US climate envoy John Kerry says climate change is a universal threat that must be kept separate from politics, adding that it should be treated as a freestanding challenge. He had met with Chinese Premier Li Qiang and top diplomat Wang Yi in Beijing in a bid to forge common ground on this climate crisis. But discussions have been complex as the world's largest economies struggle to resolve their differences. The US climate envoy has also pledged to work closely with Beijing in efforts to produce concrete results. The bilateral talks are the first since Beijing suspended climate cooperation with Washington last year.
Another high-profile American is also visiting Beijing, former US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. He met with top Chinese diplomat Wang Yi, who called him an old friend. Mr. Kissinger is not acting on behalf of the American government, but will likely brief US officials on his meetings. And Mr. Wang told him that it would be impossible to contain or encircle China. He also said that Washington's policy towards Beijing should follow what he called Mr. Kissinger's, quote, diplomatic wisdom. Mr. Wang was referring to Mr. Kissinger's historic role in the normalization of relations between Washington and Beijing. The American has maintained friendly relations with top Chinese leaders and discourages hawkish policies towards China. Mr. Kissinger has also met Chinese Defense Minister Li Qiang as part of his surprise trip to China. Mr. Li said bilateral ties had hit a low point because some American politicians aren't willing to seek a compromise with Beijing. According to Chinese media, the former US State Secretary urged the two powers to eliminate misunderstanding and avoid confrontation. For more, CNA's Olivia Xiong joins us. She is in Beijing. Olivia, Mr. Kissinger is meeting senior Chinese officials. Does this imply a thawing of relations, though?
Well, Dawn, it would seem to be the case that there is this continued push by both China and the U.S. to try and stabilize their troubled relationship. And even though Mr. Kissinger is not representing the U.S. government, this also follows several high-level visits by U.S. officials to China. If you recall, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen had visited recently as well. And Mr. Kissinger's visit is noteworthy, given that he's been credited with helping to pave the way for that normalization of China-U.S. relations back in the 70s. He met the Chinese defense minister yesterday amid frozen military talks since last year between the two sides. And today he's sitting down with China's top diplomat, Wang Yi. And Mr. Wang said that Mr. Kissinger had made historic contributions to the ice-breaking development of China-U.S. relations, adding that China cherishes the friendship between old friends. But he also did warn that it would not be possible to transform or contain China. And we do know that one of the major issues between China and the U.S. is how the U.S. has been handling its relationship with the self-ruled island of Taiwan. Mr. Wang calling on the U.S. to take actions to clearly oppose Taiwan independence if it sincerely wants stability in the Taiwan Strait. Now, this also comes as Taiwan Vice President William Lai is set to make a stopover in the U.S. next month. The Chinese Foreign Ministry hitting out at this. Have a listen.
中方坚决反对任何形式的美台官方往来，坚决反对台独分裂分子以任何名义、任何理由篡美，坚决反对美方以任何形式纵容、支持台独分裂分子及其分裂行径。
Well, meanwhile, Ollie, the US climate envoy John Kerry, he's wrapping up talks on the climate crisis with his Chinese counterpart. He's been very optimistic about the potential work that can be achieved there. Has there been any progress, though, made between the two superpowers on this?
Yes, Don, I think as you mentioned, they're optimistic about the potential, but nothing really concrete coming out from these few days of talks. And as Mr. Kerry had mentioned, this has been more about restarting engagement with China on climate change. As we know, climate change talks had been suspended following that controversial visit by then U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan last year. And Mr. Kerry saying that he hopes that this will pave the way for that COP28 climate meeting at the end of the year. Now, climate change had been one of the few topics that China and the U.S. could find common ground in prior to that controversial visit by Speaker Pelosi, but this had been stopped by Beijing last year. Mr. Kerry, in his meeting with Chinese Vice President Han Zheng, said climate change should be treated as a freestanding challenge that China and the U.S. can cooperate on amid the myriad of challenges that plague the two superpowers. But China, clearly from the statements that we are seeing, does not view it this way. The top diplomat, Wang Yi, saying that that cooperation on climate change has huge potential, but it cannot be separated from the overall environment of China-US ties. Dawn?
Ollie, thank you for that. Olivia Xiong there reporting live for us from Beijing.